So Dave, welcome. Thanks for being with us. Really appreciate you making the time today.
Bill, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, so excited about this. Super excited about this. As you know, I'm a pilot. You lived most of my dreams, so I'm living vicariously through you. I would love for people to hear a little bit about your background and what brought you to this moment. You're wearing Jocko's shirt. You're a part of Echelon Front.
Yeah.
Right. You figured out a way how to take all of these amazing experiences that you've had and bring them into the business world. But I think it's important for people to hear a little bit about your bio.
Yeah, for sure. So in reverse order, obviously, I'm thrilled to be working with Jocko Willink and Leif Babin at Echelon Front. Unbelievable company made of unbelievable people. JP Donnell, also a member of the team. Three guys that I worked with in Ramadi 11 years ago. And I certainly at the time never thought I'd be working with them in a leadership consulting company. But the thing I love about being with these guys is everything is about practical application and making a real difference. Yeah. You got to go back quite a ways, I guess, to figure out where all this how it all played itself out. But I was in the Marine Corps for 23 years. I got commissioned back in '94. I grew up in a town called El Toro in Southern California, where there's a Marine base, fighter base there. And I grew up watching jets fly overhead. And at some point, that got into my blood. And from watching them fly overhead at air shows to at some point decided that's what I wanted to do. Long, circuitous route, but found myself graduating from college, getting a commission in the Marine Corps, and going off to the basic school, becoming selecting a flight contract, and then going to flight school, and eventually becoming an F-18 pilot, getting stationed back in El Toro. I was actually the last F-18 pilot to launch out of El Toro before they closed it.
Really? Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
Really cool.
What year was that? What year did they close down El Toro?
The last Hornet flight was in 1998.
Wow.
I was in the Orange County Register or Saddleback Valley News. Some local paper there covered it. It was the last flight. The base stayed open with some helicopters and some other stuff for a little while. Yeah. But the last Hornet, the last fighter, flew out of there in late 1998.
Wow. Wow. So from there, so you that was 98. I'm trying to bring us into 9/11. So you were active duty, deployed, flying wherever 9/11 hits.
Yeah, so I ended up finishing up my training at El Toro, getting stationed at a active duty combat unit in Miramar. So the Marine Corps had moved out of El Toro and moved all their fighters down to Miramar. Took that base over from the Navy, and I was in an F-18 squadron in Miramar from 98 to 2002 was my first tour. So I'd finished one combat deployment. I used combat very lightly. I did an Operation Southern Watch deployment. In between those two deployments that I did, 9/11 happened. So the morning of 9/11, I wake up. I'm on my way into work, early morning West Coast time in San Diego, in what was going to be just a normal flying day, which obviously there became a huge transition. Very shortly thereafter, my squadron deployed aboard a carrier off to the North Arabian Gulf, doing a 7-month combat deployment to Afghanistan right after 9/11. That was at the time what I thought was my combat deployment, my big combat deployment, doing what I kind of always dreamed about doing, is flying fighters off of carriers. I came back from that. I went to Top Gun. I was invited back after being a student there. I was a Top Gun instructor for 3 years. So I spent 3 years at Top Gun, finished up my tour as a training officer, and I was getting ready to leave the Marine Corps. I was actually going to get out of the Marine Corps and go do something else, and I felt like there's just a little bit more left to do. So I actually volunteered to go on a forward air controller, a FAC tour, ground deployment, and that's what led me to Ramadi. So I did this FAC tour, this ground tour, where I was calling in air support for Marine soldiers and in this case SEALs on the ground. My deployment happened to coincide with Leif and Jocko's deployment, and we ended up working very closely together for the 7 months we were there, almost the exact same time.
Wow. In
support of a big Army brigade that was there, and obviously formed a strong bond and a strong brotherhood, which has lasted since 2006. I came back from that FAC tour, and I went back to flying F-18s, and then I flew F-22 Raptors on exchange with the Air Force. I was the first operational pilot to ever fly the F-35B. I had this really cool, really amazing flying career. But throughout all that, I stayed close with Leif and Jocko, and as I approached the big decision to either stay in for the long haul or get out of the Marine Corps and retire, I retired, letting them know that was my plan, and Leif was really instrumental, and he'd been bugging me for a while to bring me on board the team at Echelon Front, which was an absolute no-brainer, as you might guess, to
For
get to
sure.
spend my time not just working with Leif and Jocko and JP, who are fantastic people, but working with the companies that want to bring in a company like Echelon Front
Totally.
to work with them. And it really is as fulfilling as anything I could possibly imagine. You know, as a Marine, you're fulfilled, and my fear was leaving the Marine Corps. I wouldn't know where to find fulfillment again,
Totally.
that I was contributing to something.
Totally.
And with Echelon Front, you've got that infinitely.
So cool, man. It's so cool.
Yeah.
So something, we're just getting to know each other, but one of the things that I'm very involved in, I serve on the board of a military charity called Boot Campaign, and the whole concept with Boot Campaign, it was started by 5 women in Texas 6, 7 years ago. And the idea was to get celebrities in boots and then get a photograph with the slogan that says, when they come back, we give back. So it was civilians, people like me, the 99% that never served in the military, but appreciate your sacrifice, appreciate what you did. I know you're going to tell me that it was a phenomenal experience and you'd have paid money for it, but
Yeah.
but I get it. I mean, you still wrote that check, right? You signed up, you stepped forward, and anything could have happened, and you saw a lot of things happen. So with that said, what I hear from the guys, the men and women that join us, as we call them, ambassadors, veteran ambassadors that have served, they said, when I got out of the military, I realized that civilians didn't understand my world, and I was looking for that brotherhood again. I was seeking that connection, and in many cases, they find it with us with the charity. I love that you found it with Echelon Front.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I don't think it is the most powerful part of my experience in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps is a tight knit group. You know, all the services kind of have this friendly rivalry. We compete against each other, but
Sure.
anybody that's served, there's a bond there, and it's indelible,
Yeah.
and it lasts forever, and it's powerful. And yeah, you certainly took the words out of my mouth. Obviously, I was happy to serve. I feel like I got the better end of the deal during my time in the Marine Corps with all the great things I got to do. But there is sacrifice. There is loss
sure.
that you endure. There's suffering. Certainly when you do a FAC tour in a place like Ramadi, you learn to appreciate what it means to be to serve your country.
No doubt.
And the value of those relationships is really powerful. But what I found too interesting, Bill, is that sometimes it's hard to relate to military service. But the principles about wanting to get better, about wanting to be successful, and wanting to improve, and leadership. We were just talking about Jocko's book, Discipline Equals Freedom. Those are universal, and I'm amazed at how much alignment I found it. And I would offer to any veterans that have come back and they're still they're struggling finding their footing after transitioning. If you look for it, there's a ton of alignment everywhere when you get down to those core principles.
Absolutely.
And that's really what Echelon Front is about. That's what Extreme Ownership's about. That's certainly what guys like Leif and Jocko are about. It's been a real fulfilling experience for me to realize that, okay, maybe we didn't serve. Maybe you weren't in the military, and certainly I don't have quite the experience you have in the private sector. But when you look for them, the alignment is so powerful, and I'm finding the value in places that I didn't think were there before.
Yep.
And I think for all those veterans of transition, it's there. You got to look for it, but when you find it, it really is powerful.
Totally. So I, before we transition into my question about training, that's where I'm going to take you next. I close all of my talks, and I have for the last 2 years, with a story about Mikey Mansour. And if you were there, September 29th, 2006.
I left about 3 days prior to that.
Really?
Yeah.
So that story, for people unfamiliar with it, Mikey Mansour is a Navy SEAL. He carried a saw, this enormous machine gun, where he would often take point in front of a squad of SEALs who were often snipers in this case. They were in an overwatch position above Marines that were kicking in doors, pulling out insurgents. As I understand the story, correct me if I'm wrong. A grenade is tossed up onto the rooftop. It's an open rooftop with one point of egress behind Mike Mansour. It bounces off his chest pack onto the ground. He yells grenade, jumps on it, dies 20 minutes later, but saved 3 of his brothers as well as some Iraqi soldiers. Have I correctly parlayed the story?
Yeah, you bet.
So to me, that story, 25, a surfer from San Diego, where you spent a lot of time, that kind of sacrifice is unheard of. I don't know who does that. I don't know what kind of man does that. And to me, it just speaks of the ultimate commitment and sacrifice and what we're capable of. And it calls me to do more every day. And so I want you to know that one of the brothers that you served with, his life continues to be perpetuated. I know Jocko talks about it. I know Andrew Paul talks about it. But I want you to know, even as civilian, was impacted by that. And I tell that story every single time I have an opportunity. So
yeah, that's so great to hear. Obviously, if you talk to Jocko, certainly Andrew Paul was
yep.
In the same platoon there, Delta platoon. I work. JP Donnell is part of the Echelon Front team.
Yep.
Was in the same platoon. Obviously, those guys were so much closer. And I can't even begin to put
Sure.
myself anywhere remotely in that category. But I was so lucky to serve with Task Unit Bruiser, with Jocko's SEALs. Leif was in Charlie platoon. Mikey and JP and Andrew were in the sister platoon that we work very closely with.
Yep.
I hold those guys in such high regard, and I think your point about the sacrifice, and the two things that come to mind is that that sacrifice, you realize when you hear the stories about that sacrifice, is not because of the chain of command or not because of the rules or the hierarchy. It's because of how you feel about the people around you.
Absolutely.
But to hear that sacrifice transcended that rooftop, transcended those other SEALs, transcended the Iraqis, transcended those people that he saved into something even more powerful than that it has an impact even to this day.
Yep.
I take great pride in hearing that. I'm sure everybody involved in the families, those are the things you want to hear, is that those sacrifice, they're not forgotten, and they leave this indelible, permanent, long-lasting impact. And I appreciate you saying that, and I'll certainly pass that along to Jocko, Leif, JP, Andrew, and the guys.
Hell, I believe it, and what I've missed, I guess, is what I try and ask the audience to do, and I try and get through that story without crying, and it's very difficult for me to do, no matter how many times I tell it. But what I tell them is, when you say thank you for your service to a veteran, they appreciate that. But when you really get to know somebody who served, and you have a conversation that's meaningful, more often than not, what they'll say is, what they've said to me is, live a great life. Like, that's how you can thank us.
Make it count. Absolutely.
Step into it. Make it count. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, that is a real thing, man. 100%. So I appreciate you bringing that up. That is absolutely true. We just want, and I want to live a life that puts some meaning on the sacrifice the people around me made, and I feel obligated to do that. And the fact that again transcends me and gets out elsewhere is very powerful, and it means a lot. So thank you.
Well, yeah, man, you're welcome. I mean, the reason this is happening is I read your article in Business Insider, and by the way, I recommend everybody Google that. So David Berke, correctly pronounced?
Yep.
Berke, Business Insider. Just Google that. I think it's a great article. I would love for them to go check out Echelon Front, and obviously it goes without saying, if your organization could benefit from what Echelon Front does, engage them, right? Talk to them. Find out how they can help your organization. So this book is an interesting concept for me, David, that's probably 6 years in the making, if I'm honest. Like Jocko would have had a field day with me on this, because it just took so long to finally get to the point where I finally told a group of my best clients, I said, look, I'm going to have this book by next year, and if I don't let me back in the room. Like, group accountability was the key for me here, right?
I know it well.
And
that's
what got
self-sabotage, absolutely.
Totally, and that's what got it done. So the idea for me, because as a business coach, I spend most of my time with salespeople and sales leaders. That's my world in a variety of industries. And yet what I began to find with you guys is that there's a parallel. You touched on it a moment ago, but there's a parallel in so many areas. And so what I'm going to walk you through real quick is training and discipline and fear and mission planning, dealing with failure, mission debrief, please, let's talk about that, and perseverance, right? So just real quick, I don't need you to go, crazy deep on it, but when you think of training from your perspective and try and then translate it into like civilian life, what comes to mind as you think about training? Because you've had some of the best, most expensive training in history ever. You may be the guy that they spent the most money on ever. Yeah,
that's entirely possible. And that's no joke. I think I have been the beneficiary of some of the most robust and obviously expensive training. The airplanes that I flew, the organizations that I flew them with, between my time at Top Gun, especially, kind of the epicenter of fighter combat aviation training. Certainly for naval aviation, I spent all that time with the Air Force and in the F-35. So I have been the beneficiary of that. There are two things that come to mind. One is kind of very military-centric, if you want to call it that, or just a reminder of my time there, is the training has to be really hard. It has to be hard. It has to be demanding and challenging and pull out elements that you didn't know that were there. The easier it is, the less effective it is. the more routine, the more repeated it is, the less likely it's going to be effective. So training should be a challenge. It should put you in a very uncomfortable situation every single time. But the corresponding other element to that, is trying to keep it very much wave top. It doesn't need to be this crazy, robust, expensive, multi-layered thing. It can actually be very simple. You just got to find ways to replicate demanding, challenging environments that you put people in. It could be just a planning exercise on a chalkboard.
Sure.
Or it could be 40 airplanes, flying around in the middle of the night, with surface air missile systems. It could be either of those. But demanding, realistic training does not need to be expensive. It does not need to be time consuming. And it doesn't need to be, the only thing you do for weeks at a time. Find it where you can. And if I were to offer anything, certainly in the private sector, is we don't train enough. We don't make it hard enough. And we presume that it's too difficult to get to. And actually, you could seal your team for 30 minutes a week. You can come up with a realistic, difficult training for next to nothing, and it'll make a big difference.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Nobody I've spoken to has said that, and I love that. I think that is right on the money, and we need to hear that. Just like I told you about Jocko's book, for people that are viewing this, at the time that we're recording this, Jocko's latest book has just come out. Discipline Equals Freedom Field Manual. This is, if you took Jocko's DNA and injected it into a book, it comes out in this. And that's the message that just came through to me. It's like, we're all lily-livered wimps, and we can do so much more. We can do so much more. I really mean that, because he addresses mindset.
I feel the same way.
Right? Diet, sleep, fasting. It's like, dude, step up. Come on, step into it. And to me, that's the challenge that you just gave us on training. So the second question is an interesting one, and it's discipline. And let me explain to you what I mean. I want you to process that as a pilot and as an instructor, and maybe even as a forward air controller. But in our world, most salespeople and sales leaders, what I find in coaching, Dave, is I always look for, did they learn discipline somewhere else early? Because if they did, if it was the military or sports or music or academics or martial arts, right? They've learned that muscle, they've created the muscle, and we can translate it now into their civilian life or to their business life. That's what I look for. But what comes to mind when you think about discipline?
So again, I'll give you a kind of two-part answer. I think that first part is almost exactly how I would describe it. We get the question all the time, what kind of people do you want to hire? And the thing that I always say is, ask someone in an interview about a challenge they've had to deal with, some obstacle they have to overcome. And it doesn't have to have anything to do with your industry that you're applying for or the business. If you're looking for sales, it doesn't need to be a sales story about a difficult client, a story about dealing with adversity.
It's great.
Because if you have people that have grown up dealing with any kind of adversity, no matter what it is, maybe you didn't have money or you didn't have a good education or you didn't have resources or whatever it is, some dealing with adversity. If someone can explain to you, this is the adversity that I dealt with, and this is how I got over it, it's universal. That's the type of person you want to bring in. That's the type of person that will succeed in any industry. And that is the kind of the segue to that second part of my answer, which is the idea that discipline is about doing things you don't want to do that have to be done. And look, if you're the type of person that loves getting up at 4:30 in the morning, or if you're the type of person that loves lifting weights, or if you're that person that likes fighting, physical conflict, getting up early, lifting weights, and doing MMA is not going to be a big challenge for you. But those people that might,
but if you're like the other 99% of the population,
for that population, most people don't. But for me, and I tell the story about, I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I was motivated and excited to be a fighter pilot, and I found myself in an airplane, landing on a carrier at night, and saying to myself, literally, I'd do anything to get out of this airplane right now. I would trade. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't like this. And this crazy idea that I would be doing something in an F-18 that I didn't want to do. Things like motivation and excitement and all those interests, they're gone.
Yeah.
And what you have left is discipline. And look, part of it is it takes discipline to get an airplane aboard a carrier, because if you don't apply discipline, it can be catastrophic.
Totally.
But the other part of it was, for my life, especially kind of that story about not wanting to fly around the ship at night and realizing I don't want to do it, that was my life. That was going to be my life literally for years. So it was one of those things like, hey, how is this going to be? Am I barely going to just scrape by?
Yeah.
Or am I going to find myself where I can succeed and do extreme? And what I wanted to do really well. I wanted to perform exceptionally in that environment. I didn't want to just be somebody that just got by. And that the only thing I was going to have to rely on was discipline. And it was the idea that something I didn't want to do is going to be part of my life. There is not a job in the world, sales, flying airplanes, and everything in between, there aren't parts that you just don't want to do.
For sure.
And the people that do the things they don't want to do the best, they're the ones that are most successful. 100%. And that requires discipline.
Yep. 100%.
And it's not fun, it's not exciting, and nobody wants to do it. And the difference between success and failure is the people willing to.
Absolutely. So well said, man. And I heard you tell that story on the Behind the Shield podcast.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine. I mean, my brother-in-law flew, talk about the best gig in the Navy. He flew search and rescue helicopters in Rota, Spain during the Vietnam War.
Wow.
There wasn't a lot of action there. There wasn't a lot of search and rescue.
Right? On Rota.
Yeah. He had a pretty good.
It's good detail if you can get it.
He had a pretty good gig for sure. Yeah. But I remember talking to him about just this thing. Like he had not done it, but like nighttime carrier landings, I can't imagine it. So it actually bridges to the next question, which is about fear. And you've sort of addressed that you had to push that down and deal with that fear. So maybe you've addressed that already, but is there another place where you can you think back to where fear was just so real for you and you had to just like push past it?
Yeah, hanging out with a bunch of Navy SEALs in downtown Ramadi in 2006. So here's the thing about fear is we don't get to choose what we're afraid of. Yeah. That's the whole point of fear. It's irrational. We don't pick, I'm not going to be afraid of snakes, or I'm not going to be afraid of spiders.
Right.
Some people I know are deathly afraid of spiders, and some people just aren't. Some people pick up a snake off the ground, they don't even care, and some people can't even see them on TV. So you don't get to pick those things, but you absolutely get to choose how you respond to that. You know, and that's what they talk about courage is facing your fears. It's dealing with things that you don't want to deal with.
Yep.
So yeah, you know, I was afraid of flying around. Nobody likes flying around the ship at night. Some people just get used to it faster than others. Some people don't necessarily mind it. I never dealt with it, or never got over it. Yeah. I had to deal with it the entire time.
Yeah. When
I volunteered for that fact tour, and then I found myself in an environment where, look, everybody has fear. Everybody. And Jocko, if he's on this podcast, will tell you he feels and felt fear. Yep. Everybody did. The biggest, toughest, strongest guys felt fear. It gets back to the point I made earlier is it's how you choose to deal with that.
Sure.
And there were moments, several moments, and certainly the very beginning of my fact tour there when I got to Ramadi and I started to see what was going on around me, especially when you start to see people get wounded and killed, and you realize that is going to be a near daily occurrence on this fact tour, that was hard for me. And the other part of it too is to be very blunt, I didn't want to be there.
Sure.
I didn't grow up wanting to be a commando. I didn't have dreams of being Rambo. I had dreams of shooting down airplanes, as a fighter pilot. You know, that's what I dreamed of. So this fact tour was very uncomfortable, very unfamiliar for me, so far out of my comfort zone that it's very hard to describe. And one of the common themes the entire time from beginning to end was fear. I just dealt with fear. And I think I dealt with it fairly well. There were moments that it got the best of me, but for the most part, you just have to manage it. And, you know, quickly, just to kind of summarize that, all those type of deployments, all those type of experiences where you suffer and there's loss and there's all those things, you have two choices. Those things either weigh on you and they break you, and that happens a lot, sadly, or they are the best teachers in the world, and they empower you to be as successful at anything that you ever want to be. And I don't mean to simplify it so much, but a lot of it boils down to how you choose to deal with it. It's not easy, but I didn't have a choice there. If I couldn't deal with the fear, I was going to be useless, and I was going to put people at risk, and I was going to get people hurt or killed. Sure.
So great answer. I got goosebumps on that one as you described it with the simplicity of it. No, but I mean that. I do feel like it becomes kind of an either or eventuality, right? It's either going to freeze you and cause you to curl up in a fetal position. I often tell people this. When I was 40 years old, I was diagnosed with colon cancer. You're not even supposed to start looking for it back then, 20 years ago, until you were 50. right? So when I was 40, I remember taking my car to a car wash, and it was going through again on the assembly line, getting the suds, and I literally sat down on a bench, and I kind of just leaned over to one side, and I thought, dude, really? I mean, are you just going to curl up in a fetal position here and like give in? Or are you going to flip and go to war on this thing? And
Yeah.
I did. And Dave, I got not a second opinion or a third, I got 4 opinions. And the 4th opinion saved my quality of life. I would have lived with any of the first 3 versions of the surgery, but the 4th changed the way that I live today. So it could be, you called it out earlier, it could be some other application in your life, but it can either freeze you, limit you, lock you up, and you may never get past that, or it will be the thing that sharpens you and takes you to a level that you might not have ever considered.
Yeah, absolutely. And because we don't get to choose the thing that scares us, we don't get to choose when we feel fear, we don't get to choose how we respond. And it's hard. And by no means, I've had many moments in my life where, fear starts to take over and you have to just push back and keep it in its place. It's not easy. And
That's right.
It requires a lot of discipline.
For sure. I remember my first solo very much that way.
Absolutely. Yes.
Right? When that airplane hopped off the ground real quick, like, wow, there's 200 pounds that isn't in this. And now I'm by myself. Why does he think I can do this? Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Okay. So mission planning is an interesting conversation for you because you would forget the movies that we've seen other than maybe Pearl Harbor, where it probably was that hellacious, like if you can get into an airplane, get into it and go, in that moment, right? But otherwise, mission planning for you guys, have you got the visual? Are you picturing the movie?
I can imagine the scenario of just getting an airplane and launching. Yeah.
Holy crap. Yeah. So, but mission planning for you guys is huge. So walk us through that, because again, in my world, we try and coach clients to think that way, obviously with business plans and business visions and key performance indicators and metrics and so forth. But from your perspective, as you now through Echelon, as you bring this into the business world, where do you go in terms of mission planning?
So mission planning is a big part about what we discuss. And just like with everything, I'm going to talk about 2 different things. And I'll bring it back to this fundamental belief that you've heard from Jocko, you'll hear from all of us, but really Jocko talks about the dichotomy of leadership. And that's what discipline equals freedom really is about, is a dichotomy, is that balance. So on one side, that mission planning piece is this highly regimented, very structured, kind of predetermined process. And the reason that is so valuable is it gets everybody on the same page. So everybody's speaking the same vernacular. And when you start at the very beginning steps, they understand what you're doing. And when you get to the very end, that continuum is understood by everybody. And then you have this deliverable, this mission planning process that takes you from beginning to end that you can then take back to your teams. You can find places there's risk and shoot holes in it, come back and recongregate and go through it again. And because it's so regimented and so well organized, everybody understands what's happening. Everybody realizes where they are in the process, where they can contribute, what they're trying to take from it, how they fit in all these different pieces, where they can contribute elsewhere, what other people are doing at the same time, and in the end, how it fits the organization's goals, the company's goals, the firm's goals, your team's goals. And that's awesome. But at the exact same time, if you talk about this idea of this dichotomy, this 2 opposing forces that are both the same, the other great byproduct of mission planning is that it prepares you for all the eventual unknowns and chaos that's going to come out of implementing your plan. Because what everybody knows in the military, and we sort of say it as a joke, but it's true, no plan ever survives first contact, and nothing ever goes as planned. And so what you need to be able to be really flexible when things get chaotic and things turn into total disasters and your initial plan falls apart, what you need to be able to handle that is to come from a very well-regimented, organized plan. And a lot of people talk about those as SOP, standing operating procedures, or just, hey, the way we do business. So if you have that core of how you do business, deviating from that is much easier than this totally haphazard approach where, okay, there's chaos, there's a problem with what's going on, but we didn't do any planning, so everybody sees it totally differently. There's no way there's alignment. And the thing that is lacking is that nobody knows how to make decisions in the best interest of mission accomplishment and the outcome. Mission planning is about getting everybody to understand what are you trying to accomplish in the end and how do you contribute to that.
It's great.
The chaos is that it's going to be a mess. The plans will never work as we designed. But if you understand how you built the plan, if you understand why you're doing what you're doing, how you contribute, and what the outcome is, when all those deviations come in, You can say, I'm prepared for this. I know what my role is here. I need to go here and help out. I need to do this. So it's that constant balance and that constant dichotomy, strict, detailed, regimented, so you can deal with all the chaos and unpredictability that is eventually going to happen with every plan.
Love that. Love that. So well said. So failure. It's a word that nobody likes. You guys don't like it. We don't like it. But it's going to happen, right? That plans are going to fail. The mission did not go as expected. Everything that you just described leads to mission failure.
Yep.
How do you deal with that? How did Dave cope with that? When you went out on a mission and there was a failure, but how'd you deal with that?
So we talk about the only real measures of success is whether something is effective. It's either effective or it's not. Leif uses that phrase really well, and it's something that's attributed to him that I really talk about all the time, and I steal his words. You're either effective or you're not effective. Failure, I am as familiar with failure as I think anybody. Everybody is familiar with failure. So here's the way I see failure, and here's the way we talk about it, and here's the way we think about it. And it's something that is very counterintuitive, and it's something that people don't really recognize and sometimes don't even agree with me. Failure and mistakes are unrelated. And people get in their mind that if I make a mistake and another mistake and another mistake, it's going to lead to failure. Like, mistakes don't lead to failure. Mistakes, errors, that's the real world. Yeah. There is no such thing as perfection. It doesn't exist. Nothing you'll ever do will be perfect. Missions that are successful are not perfect, and missions that are failures aren't perfect. So the idea about failure is that if you can embrace the fact that you will not be perfect, you will not achieve what you're looking for in the same manner which in your mind is what you think is going to happen, failure becomes a tool to eventually be successful. And we just see these as two, like, oh, they're opposite. You're either successful or you're a failure. Well, if you are a failure and you learn from that failure and you collaborate with people around you, you recognize, admit, and own up to everything you did wrong, you and the people around you will learn from that. You will apply it, and you will eventually succeed. Failure is a 100% part of life. It is unavoidable. It's something you can't escape. What happens when failure leads to people quitting, failure leads to people giving up, and failure leads to people no longer pursuing the objective, which is effective outcomes.
Right.
That's when failure is the period on the end of the sentence. That's when failure ends the conversation.
Got it.
So you're going to fail a million different times. Big failures, little failures, small failures, everywhere. If failure is the thing that gets you to stop doing what you want to do to accomplish your mission, then you are a failure. Yep. But if a failure is the ultimate lesson is something that creates an ultimate lesson that gets you to be successful, then you're like everybody else. You're a human being.
It's great.
You made a bunch of mistakes, and you hopefully learn from it.
It's fantastic. It's fantastic. I trust that you'll have this conversation with your kids at some point. It sounds like they may be young. How many do you have?
I got 3.
And what ages?
8, 6, and 4.
So the conversations have probably already started, right? But that's a great conversation to have with your kids.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, we get tests that come back and mistakes that are made. Life is happening to my kids, and I do my best absolutely to try to get them to see it in a way that they can be successful in their adults. Obviously.
Totally. Well, you will, man. You're going to be a great dad, and I love these lessons being poured into your children, who will then go on and have their impact in the world. It's pretty cool.
I hope so.
So mission debrief. Now, I'm going to go with the blues. So at least it's still you're still related, absolutely. Right? But the only thing that I know about this is that I've seen several great videos about the Blue Angels after a rehearsal, after a performance, in the nameless, rankless debrief, where it's like, dude, if you're a captain and I'm a lieutenant and you were 200 feet low, I'm calling it out, right?
You bet.
So I know you get that. I really want people to hear what a mission debrief means to you. That's just the example that comes to my mind because I love the Blue Angels so much, and I love that precision.
Yeah.
Talk to me about debriefing a mission.
The Blue Angels is a great example. Ironically, heading to the Blue Angels change of command here in a couple of weeks.
Is that right?
2 of my closest friends are the current and the incoming CEOs of the Blue Angels. Are 2.
Very cool.
2 of my close friends, all 3 of us were Top Gun instructors together.
That's awesome.
And the Blue Angels and Top Gun share very similar approaches, which is this rank, is meaningless. Your
Yeah.
position in the flight is meaningless. So here's my take on debriefing, and it really ties in well to the conversation we just had, where mistakes do not lead to failure. Mistakes and failure are two different things.
Yeah.
Here's the thing about the debrief. If you accept what I said earlier, and not everybody does, but if you accept that perfection is a lie, it is a myth, it is simply not true. And if you accept that, and then you could admit to your subordinates, to the people that work for you in front of your leadership, that you're not perfect.
Yep.
Debriefing is about finding every single thing you did wrong. The best lessons learned are the ones that are the cheapest. So the more you can learn from other people's mistakes, and the more other people can learn from your mistakes, the less likely you're going to make that mistake when it really matters. When you go to combat, that is not where you want to learn all your lessons. Look, it's already going to happen.
Yeah.
These really demanding high-risk environments, it's already tough enough as it is.
Sure.
So the benefit of a real debrief is to bring out every single possible error you can think of that happened to you or everybody else around you. Take 100% ownership of those mistakes and how to create solutions for them, and let everybody around you see that the way you do business, the way your company does business, the way your team does business, is that you talk about everything you did wrong. The ultimate example of that is the life that I grew up in. I flew single-seat fighters my whole career. I would sit in a cockpit of an airplane, and look, you'd see there's tapes of my radar, there's videotape of things that I did, but I could get away with murder in there. I could get away with all sorts of mistakes because I was by myself, nobody would ever see it.
Yep.
And who wants to come back from a flight and go, hey, let's talk about all the things I did wrong? Nobody likes to do that.
Sure.
Top Gun, the Blue Angels, companies with that culture, what they end up doing is they build an environment where people feel like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to tell you about something I did wrong that I could absolutely gloss over or never bring up, and you'd never know it. But it is such the power of revealing your mistakes to the people around you in a debrief is what makes brilliant culture for companies, and it's what keeps people safe and alive and effective, because they learn so much more from you without having to figure it out for themselves. And I think of it just very quickly in these two terms.
Yep.
We have all grown up with our idols. In naval aviation, Marine Corps aviation, there were people that I just put up on a pedestal. There were people that I admired. I don't know of an industry in the world that when you don't start, you look at people and go, I want to be like that person.
Sure.
Just your role models.
Sure.
And if that person sat you down and said, hey, I'm going to sit you down and I'm going to tell you everything great I ever did in my career. This is your role model. You'd listen to him. You'd want to hear all these great stories.
For sure.
But if that same person said, hey, Bill, have a seat. I know I'm your role model. I know you want to be just like me. I'm going to tell you about every mistake I ever made in my life.
Yep.
You wouldn't bat an eye. You wouldn't
Absolutely.
breathe. You wouldn't leave. You would stay there as captivated as you could. You would listen to every word out of that person's mouth.
Yep.
It's the power of revealing your failures and the power of revealing your errors which makes all the difference. I like hearing stories about guys doing cool stuff, but after a while it gets a little bit old. But if the people I want to be like and admire or tell me about things I did wrong, I'm writing every single thing down and I'm going to learn from that. That is the most powerful tool I can think of. So debriefs have to be a part of a culture where people are willing to share their errors. It's not easy. It's not comfortable. People don't want to do it. But when you do, your organizations bulldoze everybody else. And you individually, you're unstoppable if you can do that.
So good,
and
man.
We talk about it all the time, yeah.
Love that. Love that. We all need to really hear that and lean into being more transparent and having a bit less ego so that everybody can grow and improve through that process, right?
Absolutely.
Well done, man. So final question for you, ironically, perseverance. Perseverance. Your story is one of perseverance. I mean, really, to be that kid, to watch the Jets in the backyard. You know, you said in the podcast that I listened to that I wasn't the best student. That's not where, I was making a reputation, and yet you persevered. And in terms of military aviation, certainly naval aviation, you rose to the pinnacle of that, and maybe then some, with some of the aircraft that you flew, and then to go on in that forward air controller role, which is unbelievable to me, by the way. I mean, I just have to, high five you on that. Dude, you went and got dirty. You were used to being out of it, right, at a distance.
Yeah.
To be in it, to me, is just remarkable and earns the utmost respect. But when you think of perseverance, I would love for you to just react to that word.
The immediate thing comes to mind is that everybody is capable of more than they think.
Yeah.
And I learned that like I had these really big plans as a kid. I knew what I wanted to do, and I did have these really grandiose ideas. And certainly in retrospect, it did work out. It worked out better than I could have ever hoped for. And I've said this before, if I went back to do it all over again, there's very little chance it would work out this well a second time around. Some of it was just, look, it just worked out, and I can't take credit for all of it. There were hurdles along the way. There were seminal moments. I think about, for me, officer candidate school, or places where really the rubber kind of really met the road. And if you were going to achieve the things I had, if I was going to achieve the things I had dreamed about, there was sort of a make or break time. There was a go time. Those really high friction points, those really high challenge points, what I learned from all of those is they were 100% mental. 100% mental.
Yep.
I'm not bigger and stronger and faster than anybody. I'm the skinniest, scrawniest. I was always in my mind, looking around at people that just looked the part more than I did. And then when I see people that look bigger and stronger than me fail, it kind of freaked me out a little bit. And I'd see them quit or not try or not put out 100% effort. All those moments were mental. They were all mental hurdles for me. And every time I succeeded, it's because I was mentally strong. And every time I failed, it's because I was mentally weak. It wasn't because I couldn't lift enough or run fast enough or jump high enough or any of those things.
Yep.
And you said it. I mean, I grew up, certainly if I think about my teenage years and those really formative years, the people that I would consider I was closest to, the people that had the closer relationships, I knew some really smart, talented people that went off to amazing schools and had amazing lives. I wasn't one of those people. I was maybe a slightly above average kid, when it came to, maybe some grades here and there, but barely above. I had to learn in my life that my mind was strong enough to get me through difficult environments, and that has never stopped. I was successful in Ramadi because of my mind, because I was able to mentally deal with it. It wasn't the fact that it was 117 degree. That's not what breaks people. It's not.
Totally.
That's why weaker, smaller, less capable people succeed in difficult environments. That's the underdog story. That's why smaller businesses outperform bigger businesses.
For sure.
That's why sales teams that don't have the resources and the marketing and the IT support and all those things, that's why they outperform their bigger, stronger competitors. And so perseverance is inside. Everybody has the ability to persevere under any environment. It's just whether or not you're willing to endure the pain that goes along with it. And a lot of times we're just not. And that's the difference maker.
So cool, man. So great example, great story. Thank you so much, Dave. Can't thank you enough, man. So I thank you for your service. I thank you for your time tonight. We wish you nothing but phenomenal success with Echelon in Front. I know that you're going to impact many corporations and many lives along the way. And I have a sneaking suspicion you're going to enjoy the process.
I think you're right. I hope so. And like I said before, I'm thrilled to be a part of it. I appreciate you having me on. This has been an absolute blast.
My pleasure, man. Take care.